So, dear friends, welcome in Rudolf Steiner branch. My name is Andrei Onegin. Today we have our dear friend Richard Steele, who is CEO of Karl Koenig Institute. Richard was born in England, Oxford, and moved in Camp Hill, Germany in 1972. And he lived with his family as leading family member for 36 years. He founded Karl Koenig Institute in 2008 with the goal of making Koenig's healing impulses widely accessible to the modern world. Dear Richard, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. It's a pleasure to be in Chicago again. The last time was 2 years ago, and that was a very special event because we had the exhibition here of Karl Koenig's pictures, and that was the first American exhibition. It was a great place to start, you know. It was good that Andre was here to make sure everything worked. It was quite a challenge to get things set up, but we managed, and it was a very special event here, a whole week with all sorts of lectures and tours and so on. And so all the 52 pictures were in this room. And that was the beginning of a tour through the United States and Canada with 18 places following on, 18 exhibitions afterwards. And I don't think we would have done this if we'd have thought it out beforehand, but it was a very special time, just over a year actually, going into these 18 different places and showing the pictures. And now, after 2 years, I come back here and realize that it's actually 65 years ago that Karl Koenig stood here in Chicago too, in the university, and gave 2 lectures here, just 65 years ago. Now, that was very special for him because he had wanted to be an American. Why? Because Ita Beckmann had told him that the future for anthroposophy belonged also to America. And if anthroposophy could not take root in Europe, then North America would be the place that roots would have to be found. And so from this, and evidently Ita Beckmann had spoken with Rudolf Steiner about this. It was not only her opinion, but together they had planned to go at least to the northwest of America. But Koenig traveled right across America giving talks about curative education mainly, but also other subjects. And today I would like to bring something about Kaspar Hauser because Kaspar Hauser was a very special theme for Karl Koenig and in connection with Ita Beckmann. That's not so widely known, but Karl Koenig did have a very special connection to Kaspar Hauser. And I think one can say that he's one of the people who carried consciousness for Kaspar Hauser through a long period of time. And how does that belong now to his connection to America? Well, maybe we'll get that this evening. We'll see. But I would like, first of all, to quote Karl Koenig on his first journey to America, which was 1960. And on this journey, he came by ship. He didn't want to fly. He didn't like to fly. So he came by ship. And afterwards, he realized you're like in a tin can for a couple of weeks across the ocean. That's actually not better than flying after all. And he was not feeling very well, but he very soon realized how rejuvenating forces are in America. One can, so to speak, rejuvenate through what comes towards one in America. And even the first night he spent, that was in Pennsylvania, he felt that he was already well again. And he said the following, or wrote the following in a letter. As I awoke on the first morning, my head was resting on the heart of the folk spirit. And I heard words coming forth from it. All human beings are brothers and sisters. The feeling of joy that grew from this was truly wonderful. Through this, I felt I was allowed to experience one of the mysteries of the American people. His very first experience of America, he'd basically only just opened his eyes to the country. It was evening when he arrived, and then waking, he had this very strong experience. He was someone who was very conscious of such feelings. And this connection to America actually never left him, although he was only twice in this country. But he felt this connection very strongly. Now, we take our jump to Kaspar Hauser. Now, of course, Kaspar Hauser is maybe a strange theme to talk about in America because he's called the child of Europe. And nevertheless, I think today we have to realize Kaspar Hauser is a child of the world. A child that appeared from nowhere in 1828. And we can say he's the person of the 19th century that we know the most about because everything was recorded. Everything. What he ate, how he reacted, what he dreamt, what he said, what he learned, how he began to see the world, to understand the world, to write, to paint, and so on. Everything is recorded in this very short life, because appearing in 1828, he only lived 5 years before he was murdered in 1833. This very short time. And one wonders, how could that be, that he becomes a child of Europe and is known not only in Europe, but at that time, even in the 19th century, even without the computer, even without the internet, people knew about this story in America, in Russia, in many places across the world. How could that be? How could such a person, such a child, appearing out of nowhere, make such an impression? And I think it's an important question to live with. We know that Ita Wegman told Karl Koenig about Kaspar Hauser, and from this time he began to realize how close the being of Kaspar Hauser and the being of Ita Wegman were to each other. And when Ita Wegman died, Karl Koenig realized he would no longer see this deep friend, Ita Wegman, would no longer be helped and guided by her in what he was building up in Puritan education, the company movement. He was hoping she would be with him. And this is also what she said to him when they saw each other the last time: I will stay with you. And so he always felt this presence of Ita Wegman, and yet in 1943, as we know, Ita Wegman died, and Karl Koenig lost this connection. It was wartime, and he was not able to see her again. And at that moment, he decided to write what he then called a sort of...
Oh my God.
It's not very well known, but we have published it in the meantime. And this Requiem for Ita Wegmann is actually about Kaspar Hauser. Strange, one could think. What lies behind this? That Karl Koenig feels he needs to write a Requiem for Ita Wegmann about Kaspar Hauser. What is this closeness to Ita Wegmann that he is pointing to? And from that day, Karl Koenig had two pictures on his writing desk. His writing desk wasn't very big because he was also not very big himself. He had a writing desk made especially rather small. I know because I sit at this desk once a year, and the chair he sat in, I hardly fit into. But on this desk he had two pictures from that day in March of 1943. One picture of Ita Wegmann and one picture of Kaspar Hauser. These two pictures are, until today, still in his rooms in Campill in Scotland. And this Requiem is actually quite a riddle. Why does he tell all this story of Kaspar Hauser in a Requiem for Ita Wegmann? And right at the end, we realize the closeness of the two. Both of them with this tragic destiny, both of them carrying something of this tragedy of their destiny, not being able to fulfill what they maybe carried with them to earth. And at the same time, carrying this tragedy with the utmost purity and selflessness. And Karl Koenig wrote then at the end of this Requiem that Ita Wegmann, like Kaspar Hauser, carried the new Mercury staff, the symbol of healing peace. And I think that is significant, to realize how Ita Wegmann went through this tragic destiny. And although she should have taken on many, many tasks from Rudolf Steiner after his death, the development of medicine, of curative education, the work with the Michael School, so much that she had to carry and was not able to for various reasons. Through the tragic destiny of the Anthroposophical Society at the time. And at the same time, Kaspar Hauser, 100 years before. This tragic destiny that he had been born 1812 into a very particular family in the political situation of the German state in its evolution. There was no German state when Kaspar Hauser was born, 1812. He would have been in a position as the Prince of Baden to help shape the future, not only of Germany, but certainly the shaping of Europe into today's time. And this destiny was taken away from him. Also a personality with a huge destiny task, and yet this destiny was taken from him. And he was put into darkness, into a dungeon for 12 years before he was released into the city of Nuremberg. So these two personalities, with a very strong destiny, with a task for our times, for the future, and both not able to follow this task, this duty, one can say, for humanity. And at the same time, to carry this destiny in a very particular way. And I think this is one of the things that Kaspar Hauser teaches us. If we study this destiny, how he was able to not only live with this tragedy, but also to transform it to something positive. so that he was able to forgive everyone at the end of his life. Even though not only was his destiny stolen from him, not only was he put into a dungeon for 12 years, into darkness, but he was then also followed and murdered. After one attempted his life in Nuremberg, he was taken then to Ansbach, where in the end he was murdered, savagely murdered. And all this time he was not allowed to find his true family, his mother. He always asked after his mother. Also very interesting. You know, one could think if one's born into a royal family, one usually should ask after the father. But no, this was not, so to speak, not in his destiny to ask for the father and therefore the hereditary situation. But he asked for his mother. But also this was not allowed. He never knew his mother. So, what do we know about Kaspar Hauser? What do people in America know about Kaspar Hauser? How many people know altogether about the story of Kaspar Hauser? I assume that you are listening or here today, that you will know something about this destiny, but certainly it's not so many people. But you know, I think although every detail of his life, these 5 years on earth, all these details are known, it is not important to know these details. Strange. It is important to realize that we actually know nothing about this person because his destiny is a riddle. Why was this crime committed against him? The depth of this crime is very difficult to understand. I'm certainly not going to try and describe it this evening because that would take a week to go into all these details. But you see, I think the important thing is that it is not his history, the story of his life, but how he managed himself to live with this uncertainty, with this tragedy, and to turn it into positivity. So that even at the end of his life, he could say, he'd been stabbed, he'd been mortally wounded on the 14th of December, 1833. He was mortally wounded and still lived 3 days before he could die. This time of 3 days is very strange because the person in whose house he lived didn't want to believe that he was murdered, wanted to assume that he'd committed suicide. And he even performed this act of committing suicide in front of him to demonstrate how that happened, how he had thrust a dagger into his chest. It is actually anatomically impossible to stab yourself the way he was stabbed, through 3 organs at once. It was a very, I think, probably a wound which was very well premeditated. It would be impossible to do this oneself. But Meyer, who was his teacher and in whose house he lived, was convinced that it must be suicide, and therefore he demonstrated in front of the dying young man, child, you have to say. In front of him, he performed this act of suicide with a piece of raw meat, so that at least blood would flow to show how this act of suicide was enacted. You see, going through all this, having his destiny taken away from him, being put into a dungeon, into darkness for 12 years, and then not being able to reconnect to his destiny afterwards, but being murdered whilst looking for his mother. All this and this connection to the person who was supposed to be looking after him, teaching him, all this he was able to turn into a positive mood in these last 3 days. It's almost impossible to imagine this teacher in front of him with a dagger and a piece of meat, and all this the utmost disrespect for this young man who was dying. And yet, he managed to say in the last, with his last breath, more or less, God has only given me the best people. He has no one to forgive. Is that not an amazing, let's say, healing of destiny in one's own life? To say, God has only given me the best people. And particularly with this destiny, are we actually able to say, God has only given me the best people in our destiny? And in this case, it is the utmost a gift of forgiveness, which we can almost not comprehend. So, that is something that Kaspar Hauser gave to the world, this act of forgiveness, of taking on one's own destiny, saying yes to one's own destiny. And I think this is also something which is, for our times, quite an important feat, to say yes to one's destiny. Are we really, at the end of our life, able to say completely yes to one's destiny, even if it is not as difficult as this particular young man? It is not so easy. But we do know from Rudolf Steiner that he once said, the greatest thing we can achieve in life is to say yes to our destiny. The greatest thing we can achieve is to say yes to our destiny. So what do we know about Kaspar Hauser otherwise? We know how he died, how he came to terms with his destiny. We know how he connected in a very special way to Christianity. He was probably murdered because he had connected in a very deep way to the being of Christ. Through so many classes of religious lessons on his own with the preacher, who himself felt he had been taught by this child. And we have the feeling that here is a person who probably was in a situation for the first time to connect to the Christ being. Perhaps out of an incarnation which was before the coming of Christ. So deep is this connection that he could take up now. But that would be a thing for itself. This very deep connection where he cried when he was told the story of the destiny of the Christ being. And he cried when he saw the figure of Christ on the crucifix on the wall. Take this man down. It's hurting. You said, no, it's only wood, Kaspar. No, it's hurting. Take it down. So we can see this is one element also of Kaspar Hauser, that he had this very, very deep connection to Christianity, and probably one realized this connection to the Christ being was something which made it necessary to assassinate this young person. That was the last part, so to speak, of this crime against this child. Why do we think this? Well, Rudolf Steiner didn't actually say very much in public about Kaspar Hauser. We only know one thing, really, during the lectures he gave in Nuremberg. And of course, Rudolf Steiner had to mention Kaspar Hauser in Nuremberg, but quite superficially. In the lectures about the Apocalypse of St. John. Very interesting that this is that connection. But it's not very deep going, and one wonders why was Rudolf Steiner not able or didn't see the necessity to speak more about Kaspar Hauser. And because in private conversations he did say very deep realities about this destiny. So why did he not speak about it? And I think one has to realize that he had already spoken about the occult law, that one is not able to speak about initiates that work out of Rosicrucianism until they have been dead for 100 years. And that was not the case with Kaspar Hauser. He died in 1833. Rudolf Steiner would only have been able to speak about this individuality in 1933. Is that not interesting? But let me get to the point that Rudolf Steiner in conversations actually, on the one hand, said the destiny of this child would have been to build a new Grail kingdom in the south of Germany. That is quite a huge task. He was born in Karlsruhe as the Prince of Baden. Karlsruhe was the castle of the sun. And if you've not seen Karlsruhe yourself, you can Google it on Google Maps and you will see how from the castle of Karlsruhe the streets go out like rays of the sun. It was designed as a castle of the sun. And so this child was born into this situation and would have had the destiny to build, to form out a new Grail culture, let's say, in the south of Germany. Imagine in the process of Germany becoming a Central European state, connecting to the neighbors, connecting across the world, because of course this family was connected in many, many ways, also as far as America and as far as Russia. It would have been a very particular situation. Not only the castle of the sun, but also this political situation of Baden. So that is one mission that Kaspar Hauser would have had and, of course, could not take up. And then, however, we know of a second question. When Rudolf Steiner was asked, and that was by Ehrenfried Pfeiffer, he spoke about this when he was here in America, that he asked Rudolf Steiner what the mission of Kaspar Hauser was, and Rudolf Steiner said, Kaspar Hauser, if he had not lived and died the way he did, then the connection of the human being to the spirit would have been severed completely. Now that is huge. And I just want to point to this because, on the one hand, he would have had a huge earthly task in the south of Germany, in the development of Europe, in the development of world history. That was thwarted. But in the place of this, he could actually take on a task which was even greater. Born into a time of materialistic science, born into a time when actually, we can say, religion was in a descent in Europe particularly, and Kalkönig says, it was a world which had forgotten its divine past, its divine origin. And into this, Kaspar Hauser was born in 1812, appeared in 1828, and was murdered in 1833. It is as if I may say it in this way, as if he was placed into this situation like a homeopathic medicine. A little drop which actually can create something very big, a healing on a huge scale. I would like to make this comparison because how else can we understand that Rudolf Steiner says without the way Kaspar Hauser lived and died, the connection of the human being to the spirit would have been completely severed. This is huge. So there are many questions to go with this, but let me leave it at questions for the moment. Let me read you the words that Kaspar Hauser wrote himself in 1829. It's a verse called Contentment. Contentment is the greatest grace. It changes water into wine, grains of sand into pearls, raindrops into balsam, poverty into riches, the smallest into the largest, the most common into the most pure, the earth into paradise. Beautiful is the heart which remains in harmony with itself at all times. Beautiful is a life in which all deeds are in harmony with each other. In this very simple verse, we can sense a little bit this medicinal drop, this homeopathic drop, which was inserted, so to speak, which could take place at this situation in the 19th century through the life and then also the death of Kaspar Hauser, the way he lived and died. And that is what has affected the world since 1833. It is what has lived on of Kaspar Hauser, and therefore we don't need to know all these many details about what he had for lunch and how he reacted to cats and what he dreamt and so on. That is not so important, but to realize that through the way he lived and the way he died, he actually was able to perform something of universal magnitude. Maybe just a little drop in the 19th century, but something which has lived on in humanity. We are in a different position through the life and death of Kaspar Hauser if we take seriously what Rudolf Steiner said about it. So, how did he live on? He did nothing really except a few poems and a few very nice little pictures, watercolors that he did. They're very nice, but there was nothing great that he actually brought into life, except the way he lived. We can say he lived as a very human being. And that is what affected him. And of course, there were other children, feral children, that one knows about, particularly in the 19th century, funnily enough. And with these children, it was usually the question, are they already human, or are they actually still animal? With Kaspar Hauser, he affected people in a very different way. They had the question, is he still human, or is he already an angel? And even the criminologist Feuerbach, who dealt with Kaspar Hauser, you imagine 19th century and very famous criminologist and judge, and someone who's challenged the king of Bavaria, says the following about him. One experiences with Kaspar Hauser something like the reflection of the spirit in the soul of an angel. It's rather unusual, but so many people around him experience this, that a very high being, a being from before paradise, was actually born into the 19th century. And therefore, this very deep connection to Christianity, which was able to come about out of nothing, so to speak. And what lived on, as I say, not really the poems. I don't suppose that many people have read these poems of Kaspar Hauser or the paintings he did. But what has lived on is something of this experience of humanity, of forgiveness, this childlike being, this purity of paradisical human being. That is what has lived on. It is what affected people at the time, and it is what has lived on. And interesting, it's lived on particularly through art. And that is, I feel, quite important. Art is the vehicle, so to speak, that this sensing of purity, of humanity, could actually live through from the 19th century until today. Poems, paintings, films, if we think of Werner Herzog, an extremely artistic film about Kaspar Hauser. Music, Susanne Vega, for instance, The Wooden Horse, maybe some of you know. Many, many works of art which have carried the consciousness of this child of Europe into our time, and has affected people in a similar way that Kaspar Hauser was able to affect people until today. That is quite amazing, I think, and can only be understood if we realize the depth of this task that Kaspar Hauser was able to fulfill. He was not able to fulfill the task of building a Grail kingdom, but he was able to fulfill the task of upholding the contact to the spirit world. And this has lived on through art, through the book by Jakob Wassermann, of course, which is a very beautiful work of art. It is literature. It is not a historic document, it is literature. Through all forms of art, something has lived on of this spirituality, the immediate experience of this connection to spirituality. Like a child, when we look into the eyes of a child, we can see the connection to the spirit. We can see that the child has come from the spirit world. And in a similar way, the experience of this child of Europe, even if he was then 20, 21 years of age, this child could stream the experience of spirituality into his time and into our time. Now, how does this connect to today? Well, let me just show you a couple of pictures, because these are modern pictures, they are recent pictures about Kaspar Hauser. I will put two up here, and those of you online can see them too. This is a contemporary painter called Greg Tricker. He has created a cycle of paintings about Kaspar Hauser, and also some stone carvings, but mainly paintings, which are quite exceptional. And you just imagine this person, Greg Tricker, discovering Kaspar Hauser without knowing the history. That's quite amazing, really. Through art, he was able to sense something of the importance of this destiny and dedicated a few years of his life to painting these pictures of Kaspar Hauser. Some very interesting pictures, and so that his form of art was actually named by The Guardian. In England, we have a few English people here who know how important The Guardian was, at least. A whole page in The Guardian which said, Greg Tricker has found a new, modern sacral art. That's quite something. But you see, it was Kaspar Hauser that helped him on this path. The experience of Kaspar Hauser that he felt he had to bring into his paintings formed out a new style of painting. Another artist, I wanted to show you these for various reasons. We have these 35 paintings by Greg Tricker in the Karl Koenig Institute, and we display them, and we exhibit them quite often. As yet only in Europe, unfortunately, but maybe sometime in America too. And this artist, David Newbert, he has created exceptional illustrations for a book about Kaspar Hauser. It's a series of 8 drawings, actually, black and white drawings. And 2 of them, I show them now. They are actually 8, very special, leading into the depth of this destiny of Kaspar Hauser. I show them because we have these 2 cycles of pictures in the Karl Koenig Institute, but I show them because we can see them as an example of how this deep experience of spirituality is able to live through art into our time and to ray out to the hearts of those who take in this art. It touches people today as it touched people in his time. Now, I have a research question that I want to leave as a question, but nevertheless, I would like to follow up on it a little bit today, because the question is, what was then really the connection between Kaspar Hauser and Rudolf Steiner? We don't know too much because he didn't say too much about it. He was not able or not allowed to say too much about it. But we can sense that there must be a very special connection there. How can it be that after the death of Kaspar Hauser in 1833, we have then very soon the appearance of Rudolf Steiner with Anthroposophy? And of course, a new connection to the spirit through Anthroposophy in our time. Surely that must be linked together. And it is a research question that I think we can look at. There is just 100 years between the appearance of Kaspar Hauser, 1828, and the appearance of Rudolf Steiner, 1861. Sorry, 33 years. Let's say 100 years. No, 33 years. A cycle of 33 years, which we know from Rudolf Steiner is a very particular historical rhythm. Exactly 33 years after the appearance of Kaspar Hauser, Rudolf Steiner appears. Is that coincidence, or is there a particular connection? So let's just take an example. The date on which Kaspar Hauser died, December 17th, we can look into the work of Rudolf Steiner and ask, what did Rudolf Steiner actually speak about on December 17th in various years? And you will see that this day was always a very particular theme. And you can see very strong connections to Kaspar Hauser on these days. I will give you two examples. One example is 1906 already. On the death day of Kaspar Hauser in 1906, Rudolf Steiner speaks about, and probably you will know this, about the symbols and signs of Christmas. He speaks about the Christmas tree and the signs on the Christmas tree and so on. But he also speaks about the forms of initiation. And he very particularly speaks about the form of initiation which is called the hero of the sun. He stresses this so many times, the hero of the sun. This is the name that was used for a very special form of initiation. And when someone had reached this stage of the hero of the sun, then, and this is explained exactly on the death day of Kaspar Hauser, then this person no longer has an earthly name. Is that not interesting? That Kaspar Hauser, of course, no longer had an earthly name. His name had been, so to speak, stolen. Kaspar Hauser was not his true name. And so Rudolf Steiner gives a little hint on this day about something which could have to do with Kaspar Hauser, who was born into this castle of the sun, and who we know had a particular connection to the sun. Well, that would be a whole thing for itself, because even in the work of Jakob Wassermann in this novel, there is a whole chapter called The Worship of the Sun. You see, this artist, this writer, Jakob Wassermann, who had such a strong connection to Kaspar Hauser. He felt that as his life's task to write this novel. There is a whole chapter called The Worship of the Sun. It is quite an extraordinary chapter. And even if you don't reread the whole book, do read this chapter. It is very special. And we can sense that, yes, this being, Kaspar Hauser, had something to do with this being, with this hero of the sun. Something that we hear from Rudolf Steiner on this day, on this death day of Kaspar Hauser. Another example I would like to give you is extraordinary from the date, I think, because also on the 17th of December, 1912, it's the death day, but 100 years after the birth. It's December 17th, the death day, in 1912, 100 years after the birth of Kaspar Hauser. Is that not a moment where we can expect Rudolf Steiner to give some particular indication about this being? And indeed, maybe you will know that a very particular lecture was given on this day. December 17th, 1912, I think a quite singular lecture which was called The Mission of Love in Our Time, of Love in the World, I think the name of the lecture is in English. And there he gives a whole lecture about love, which in a way does not fit into the work he's doing at the time in 1912. In the first instance, then you can see how it does fit, and as you say, Andrei, at the same time Rudolf Steiner was speaking to the Russians in a very particular way. Interesting to look for these connections, and you will see what he gave about the being of love in 1912 is very particular. Is that not a hint about this being of Kaspar Hauser? Well, I will read something about this out of this lecture in a moment. Something else with 1912, and I would like to come back to the exhibition here, the calendar of the soul. As I hope you will remember, 1912 was, in a way, the birth of the calendar of the soul. 100 years after the birth of Rudolf Steiner, the calendar of the soul was born. 1912, yes.
Kaspar Hauser.
Pardon?
You said Rudolf Steiner.
Sorry, thank you. 100 years after the birth of Kaspar Hauser, the calendar of the soul was born. Now, it's very interesting to see, and I spoke about this during the exhibition, that actually Rudolf Steiner wanted to form the society which became the Anthroposophical Society in 1912, which couldn't take place. It was this society he spoke of as the Society of Theosophical Art and Lifestyle, Gesellschaft für Theosophische Art und Kunst, which couldn't take place. Very strange. And Rudolf Steiner announces this founding of the society on December 14th, the day on which Kaspar Hauser was murdered. 14th of December. On this day, he says, during the days of Christmas, we will develop this foundation of the new society. And it didn't happen. And at the end of Christmas time, at Three Kings Day, he was asked, is nothing going to happen? And he basically said, no, you have not prepared it. And therefore it didn't take place. Only later could then the Anthroposophical Society be founded. But what he wanted with this society for art and lifestyle did not take place. And I think it is important to see what could not take place through Rudolf Steiner. There's a few things we know about, and this is one of them. Is it not a mystery that he is not able to do this in 1912? And the only thing, basically, that came out of this foundation that didn't take place, the only thing that actually came about was the calendar of the soul. Quite extraordinary. And I do think that we can sense that the calendar of the soul has something to do with this new path to the spirit, which Kaspar Hauser had prepared. Now, this is a big step to take, I realize. But with the exhibitions, we have tried to show how these 52 meditations, this path through the meditations, are a very definite path of initiation. It is a path to the spirit, not a path to nature. It would be a misunderstanding to think it is a way of understanding nature. It is not. It is a way of finding a new path to the spirit. And that is possible through Kaspar Hauser, we have heard from Rudolf Steiner. 100 years after the birth of Kaspar Hauser, the calendar of the soul is given. Karl Koenig had, as he very often had, a very instinctive approach to these things. Just as he awoke with the folk spirit of America, in a similar way, he awoke with the calendar of the soul. And when he did these drawings that we had in original here, the picture for St. John's, and I'll bring it into the middle, the picture for St. John is actually a picture of Kaspar Hauser. And if we realize that St. John, the time of St. John, is the height of this path to the Spirit. It is where the Spirit can speak to us from the heights. And there he has pictured Kaspar Hauser in the mystery of his sacrifice. in this little blue box down here, and he is crying blue tears. This sacrifice of Kaspar Hauser. Karl Koenig sensed how this central point of the calendar of the soul, this path to the spirit in St. John's time, belongs actually to Kaspar Hauser, or Kaspar Hauser has enabled this path, so to speak. So, we have to remember that the path of the calendar of the soul is a path of the heart. It's a path of feeling. It is not a path of cognition, but of heart cognition. Let me read this to you from the preface of Rudolf Steiner, because I think it is important to maybe to read the preface every week when you read the verse, to realize what actually Rudolf Steiner meant with this path. The aim of the calendar of the soul, there we have it, the aim is self-knowledge through feeling. A very simple, short sentence, right? The aim of the calendar of the soul is self-knowledge through feeling. And then explains a little bit more. Through the verses expressing the characteristic mood of the respective week, this feeling self-knowledge can experience the timeless cycle of the soul in relation to time. The timeless being of the soul in relation to time. Not in relation to nature, but in relation to time. This is big. But you see, it is a path of feeling. And I think that is of all importance. The aim is self-knowledge through feeling. And so it is an artistic path, so to speak. The calendar of the soul is a work of art. It is an incredible work of art with 52 parts to it. They're not 52 works of art, but it is one work of art, which Karl Koenig wanted to illustrate. Let's take a look at the question again, the closeness of Rudolf Steiner to Kaspar Hauser, and I will read you the verse of the calendar of the soul for the week of death of Kaspar Hauser. If Kaspar Hauser had not lived and died the way he did, the connection to the spirit world would have been severed. What is in the verse of this week of Kaspar Hauser's death? It's verse 34. Sorry. I get my numbers mixed up sometimes, you know. Speaking English and German, you tend to get the numbers the wrong way around. I actually mean 43. No. No. Correct myself, 36, the week of Kaspar Hauser's death. Verse 43 belongs to it, but to this cross. But this is verse 36, the week of December in which Kaspar Hauser died. Within my being's depths speaks, striving to reveal itself, mysteriously, the cosmic word. It's quite an extraordinary expression, I think. Within my being's depths speaks, striving to reveal itself mysteriously, the cosmic word. And what does the cosmic word say? what is the cosmic word, I think is a question. Is that not the Logos itself? Mysteriously, it speaks within me. Fill the aims of your work with my spirit light, to offer yourself through me. This is quite an exceptional verse. The cosmic word in me, or let's say the Logos in me, is speaking. Fill the aims of your work with my spirit light, to offer yourself through me. And what were the last words of Kaspar Hauser at his death? Not my, but your will be done. This, to speak with St. Paul, the Christ in me is speaking. Exactly what we find in the verse 36 of the calendar of the soul. There we have the situation of Kaspar Hauser's death, this sacrifice of Kaspar Hauser. And at the same time, we have this question of Earth's destiny, of our work. What do we work here on Earth? What is our task? And we begin to realize it is exactly what Rudolf Steiner spoke about with the fundamental social law. That work cannot be paid, because work is actually only to be done out of love. Work has to be seen as a sacrifice of the human being. And it is quite extraordinary that the fundamental social law is also something that Rudolf Steiner could not finish. He began these essays in 1905, and at the bottom of the third essay it says, to be continued. It was not continued. Much later he said, because no one was interested. Now, why do I bring this? To demonstrate how close Kaspar Hauser and Rudolf Steiner actually were, in a very deep way. And at the same time, we can see how this being of Kaspar Hauser can shine into our times, into real questions of social life. The being of work in our time, the question of economy in our times is so important. It will be important for the future of mankind. To realize the spiritual reality of work, not being part of economy, but being given out of love, out of sacrifice. Now, let me just read you this line out of the lecture I told you about in 1912, about love and its meaning in the world. Rudolf Steiner, 17th of December, 1912. Suppose, for example, that we work and our work brings gain. It may also be that our work gives us no joy because we do it simply in order to pay off debts, not for actual reward. Strange way to begin the lecture, maybe, but then it goes to the point. Now let us apply this example to our actions in general. By everything we do out of love, we pay off debts. Our egoism gains nothing from deeds of love, but the world all the more. Occultism says, love is for the world what the sun is for external life. Wow, that is a meditation in itself. Love is for the world what the sun is for external life. You see, the sun comes into this. Would it not be absurd if a man who delights in the flowers growing in a meadow were to wish that the sun would vanish from the world? Translated into terms of moral life, this means our deep concern must be that an impulse for sound, healthy development should find its way into the affairs of humanity, into social reality, to disseminate love of the earth in the greatest measure possible, to promote love on the earth, that and that alone is wisdom. That is a continuation, so to speak, of what he gave as the fundamental social law on a very deep level. And he finishes this lecture with a word which I really think is a deep meditation. It is not through our deeds of love, but through deeds of a different character that we perfect ourselves. Yet the world is richer for our deeds of love. Love is the creative force in the world. It's big, but you see, this very special lecture on the death day of Kaspar Hauser, 100 years after his birth. It is quite exceptional. So let me bring this all together, this question of research. It's only a few examples now, but I think it would be a very deep research to see what is this real connection, this closeness of Kaspar Hauser and Rudolf Steiner. Why is this important? Because I think it has to do with the question of where the anthroposophical society, where anthroposophy has to go 100 years after 1925. Is this not a new phase which has to begin? It is no use to celebrate 100 years of anything unless we celebrate it as a new beginning. 3 times 33 years means we are able to begin something in a new phase, on a new level. And what can this new level be for anthroposophy? And I do think it has to do with exactly this introduction to the calendar of the soul. Feeling, the path of the heart is all important for the future of anthroposophy. Let me put that onto 3 levels. Firstly, this experience that Kaspar Hauser was able to give. What is the human being? Not what is the hereditary situation or so, but what is the human being? Humanity in itself, the child of Europe, the child of the world. Secondly, heart knowledge. What is heart knowledge? How can we take in anthroposophy to a new level, that it is no longer just thought, but it can become heart knowledge? And thirdly, how can this flow through to social life in such a way that not only the world can be healed, but also karma can be healed? At the end of his life, Rudolf Steiner, as you all know, began to speak of his closest pupils as brothers and sisters. Surely this is something completely new for an initiate in the earthly world, to speak to brothers and sisters. And I do think that in the quest for the spirit in the future, we will need to look to this question of Rudolf Steiner. Are we brothers and sisters? As implied. What does that have to do with the task of America? I'm going to keep this very short because I'm not qualified to speak about the task of America. And yet, I think that exactly this is something that has to do with the task of America and the possibilities of the American people. That the human being can be experienced at a new level, that heart knowledge can take place, and that karma healing can flow into daily life. Why do I see that as something which has to do with the American people? I think one can experience that America has a little bit of a similar destiny to Kaspar Hauser, where perhaps there are many trials that America has to go through. Maybe something like the destiny is being taken away, or maybe betrayed in a certain way. Maybe the outer mission of America will be taken away. Maybe it will change in the very near future. Possibly. But maybe the good can become out of this tragedy. And I think that has very much to do with the destiny of Kaspar Hauser, and to see how perhaps in this youthful spirit of America, it is not an old folk spirit like European folk spirits. It's very youthful, let's say child of the world, may be something completely new in connection with a new form of anthroposophy can take place. Let me, in connection with that, quote Karl Koenig for this, just to bring that to a close, this question, it is really only a question about the American people. What Karl Koenig perceived as a task for America. He said when he returned to Scotland, and he gave a very long report about his journey to America, and he had to say during this report, please don't all get so excited that you all want to go to America. So you see, he was very excited when he returned and gave a very lively report. We've printed it in this little book too. It will at last come about by very hard lessons which the Americans still have to learn. Lessons of poverty and deprivation, maybe, until at last the fundamental social law of which Rudolf Steiner spoke will be discovered. Interesting that he saw that as a task of the American people to renew economy in this sense. The American has certain inborn traits which will make it possible for him to live according to this law of the future. The whole time during my visit over there, I had the impression that it is a nation on trial. God is moving the American hearts. He tests the reins of people whom he expects will lead humankind into a better future. Said in 1960. I think we can perhaps take this to heart for today's situation. Thank you.
So, dear Richard, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. So, dear friends, we are moving to our question and answer section of our meeting. So I know it's about 60 or so people online. And please, so in order to take your questions in chronological order, so I'm talking to our guests, so please raise your hand. So do you know how to do it? It's little icon reactions in the bottom of your screen. Right of your middle, just click on it. And Mihai, could you just please invite a person to ask a question? Or we have in the front members of Rudolf Steiner branch, so we can do it just.
You don't need to click on your screens if you're here.
Exactly. Okay, so we can start. So who will be first? So again, we will just take one question from online people and one question from present, physical present. Oh, yeah, you can just speak, dear friends. Hello, yeah, I can see you. So just go ahead and ask questions. We would like to hear.
I can't unmute anybody at once, it will be chaos.
No. Just raising hands and you will unmute.
Not raise hands yet.
Okay. So don't be shy.
Andre, I think there is a.
Yeah, go ahead. So I cannot hear you for some reason.
I just wanted to let you know that there is a Mrs. Burkhardt who is raising her physical hand on the screen. So I think she wants to say something.
We cannot hear you.
So she
Yeah,
has
try again.
she has to unmute herself.
She's unmuted.
Oh,
Questions from this audience. So
It's not working.
I don't know.
Can she type her questions?
she can speak now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, finally. Excellent. Go ahead.
If you can hear me, there is Mrs. Burkhardt who has been waving her hand to the screen for quite a number of minutes. I think she wants to ask a question.
Hey.
Yeah.
Helena, right? Yes, go ahead. Helena, our older member, she's 94. Our consultant. Yes, go ahead, Helena. Ask your question. Yes, we're ready. Just, can you talk? Yes.
You want me to talk?
Yes, please. Well,
Oh, okay. Mine is, if you gave the answer, the greatest thing we can achieve in our life is, but I didn't get the answer. Did you hear me?
Yeah, the sentence, complete sentence is, the greatest thing one can achieve in one's life is to say yes to one's destiny.
Okay.
I hope I quoted it correctly,
Yeah.
Richard,
And,
but
thank you
yeah.
so much. And then I would like to know the pictures which were shown. Who was the painter?
painter.
Okay, the painter. The two painters that I've presented just as examples, but particularly because they're examples we have in the Kalkonik Institute. We have from Greg Tricker, who is an English painter. There are two examples here. They're not very good examples, I'm afraid, because I couldn't bring the originals. The original of this picture, can you see it? Yeah. The original of this picture with the horse is, that is
Painted these pictures.
Greg Tricker is the painter. He's a contemporary painter. And this picture is actually about 5 foot high. Yeah? So you can imagine, it's quite an impressive picture. He painted quite often on wood. This one is actually on canvas, this one is on wood. This is Kaspar Hauser and the Angel. This one is called The Mystery of Kaspar Hauser, and this Kaspar Hauser and the Angel. And his work is actually quite special. As I say, 35 pictures he painted during the time of about 2.5 years, where he concentrated completely on the story of Kaspar Hauser without having any historic background. It is quite special that, for instance, the horse he painted comes very close to the real toy horse that Kaspar Hauser had in his dungeon, which we have today. So we know what it looked like. Greg Tricker didn't know what it looked like, but he had a feel for it out of his artistic feeling, self-cognition, maybe, and was able to paint, for instance, also the town of Nuremberg. He had never been to the town before, but he painted a wonderful picture of the old town of Nuremberg. And when he went there for the first time, he said, "Oh, my dear, it's just like I imagined." To see the old buildings, the tower where Kaspar Hauser was held prisoner, it was quite special. So that is one painter, Greg Trigger. And as I say, these are very special pictures, some very large ones, this size, this width, and some of them 5 feet high. So that would be a challenge to come and bring them to America, but maybe we can do something online with his pictures. And then David Newbutt, he lives in Scotland, in Cardill, and I showed these two pictures as examples of illustrations for a book about Kaspar Hauser. They will be exhibited this coming summer in Ansbach at the Kaspar Hauser Festival. So if you would like to take the journey to Ansbach, to the place where Kaspar Hauser lived the last years of his life and died, then you will be able to take part in the week-long Kaspar Hauser Festival and see also these pictures.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, dear friends, who is next? Maybe any questions from our audience here?
Looks like Nancy has a question.
Okay, Nancy, go ahead.
Richard, thank you so much for this beautiful offering and helping us all focus on the amazing being of Kaspar Hauser, as well as Koenig's connection and so forth, and reminder for this country. I would just like to say that I feel that Kaspar Hauser is almost the example for our age of the terrible things that have happened to children all over the world and still are, and that we have now an enormous epidemic of children with autism. And so this is asking for us to look to the qualities that they are bringing into the stream of evolution. And many of them, a certain portion, also have extraordinary gifts of clairvoyance. So I believe that Kaspar is helping us show the way, both to the power of the Luke Jesus child, of the innocence of this being persecuted in such a way that this primal blessing and innocence of the Luke child is really a key gift of Kaspar Hauser's connection and shining into the world as you say, even now for our time, to remind us of the higher destiny of this country, which is cosmogony, as my dear friend Willie Stuker, who lived a Kaspar Hauser life and brought astrosophy, which is the wisdom of the stars with Dr. Breda, and that astrosophy applied just as Ida Wegman's and Rudolf Steiner's medical work applied to the special needs children as its first application. And then the star work is the what you call a spiritual biography that brings another healing quality. So these are also deeply connected with the deep therapeutic challenges of the world, and especially here in America. And I hope that your work is widely shared so it can benefit more than just those of us who are watching you today. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd like to underline the importance of the child in our time and the destiny of the child in our time. You pointed to the tragedy of so many children in our time. And we can also say it is a tragedy of our time that childhood is stolen from almost every child because intellectual thought is brought in much too early. That is also a theme one could look to in the question of the destiny of the child today. That in actual fact, something of the being of Kaspar Hauser is present for so many children today who are not able to live a child life, but are seen as small adults who need to be trained intellectually much too early. So there are very many levels to the tragedy of children today, and thank you very much for pointing to that. By the way, it is important what you say about Willi Sucher, for instance, and his cosmology, to remind you that Willi Sucher worked together with Carl Koenig in Scotland for a couple of years. They were together in the internment camp during the war and worked together on this theme of the calendar of the soul. So yes, Willi Sucher is always a little bit a part of our exhibitions too. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So, more questions, dear friends. George, would you like to speak?
Oh, okay. I thought I was already asking the questions there, but I just wondered if there's anything more that can be said by Richard on paying our karmic debts on one hand, and I also asked, I wonder if Kaspar Hauser might have perhaps been an incarnation of a Nathan Jesus child. And I also wanted to say thank you so much for all your sharing.
Did you hear? So is he asking, maybe, George is asking, maybe Kaspar Hauser was incarnation of Nathan Jesus child, Nathan's soul. So, question of here, that's not mine.
Okay. I don't actually like to come to conclusions, but rather to live with questions. And that is one question one would need to do a lot of work on. Because yes, there is a very strong connection, very definitely. If it is the same individual, I would actually personally doubt. But doubt is also a path forwards to live with the question, and maybe we can have some time at one time to delve more into that question. Yeah.
Thank you, Richard. So Yaya is next.
Yes, okay. I just wanted to thank you for reminding us, Richard, about the fact that the way we approach the calendar of the soul, because if we only approach it as poetry to be analyzed and sectionalized and categorized, we are getting nowhere. If we have just a theoretical approach in terms of what one might consider spirituality, but only at an intellectual level, it doesn't take us anywhere. But the approach of the heart is the most fulfilling, heartwarming experience one can have. So I really wanted to thank you for reminding us of how to approach it from the heart. It's so important. It's as important as the sentence that you read from the lecture of the 17th of December 1912, that love is for the world as the sun is for external life. I think it is as powerful, said in just a very brief sentence, as it is in the evolving of the 52 weeks project and work of art, as you rightly described it, of the calendar of the soul. So thank you so much for reminding us of this very important point. They apply to us every single day. It can give meaning to the darkness we are going through in order to be the creator of the light for tomorrow.
Yes, thank you very much. I actually like to start a talk about the calendar of the soul by asking if anyone is here who understands the verses, you know. And usually nobody actually volunteers to say they do understand the verses. And I think that's a good starting place, you know, to realize that we actually, so to speak, cross over a border there where our intellect cannot follow. If we try to take in the immensity of this path of 52 verses, particularly, but even to look at one verse, who can say they really understand it? And I mean, having translated all 52 verses, I can tell you they are so deep that the intellect cannot manage. And it's not bad if we own up to that and say, no, in actual fact, I've read the verses for 20, 30, 40 years, but no, I don't understand them. That's wonderful, because then we have a precondition to begin to understand with the heart.
May I add just one more thing before I shut up completely? It's the fact that if you approach the calendar of the soul or any even of the Steiner lectures only and exclusively at an intellectual level, you might become brighter intellectually, but you're not becoming more human. And it is a privilege that we have been given through the calendar of the soul, through all the 400 odd lectures that we've been regaled with by Steiner, to at least attempt to become better human being. So thank you, Richard, for reminding us of all these aspects. Very precious.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yaya. Okay, so Nancy was next, Nancy Foyer.
So, Richard, you were going to read, I believe, his tribute to Ida Wegman, which became a tribute to Kaspar Hauser. I've always been impressed with the fact that Ida Wegman died unexpectedly in Dornach and also unexpectedly for Karl Koenig. And as I understand, he spent that whole night of his first shock of grief writing about Kaspar Hauser. Was that what you're referring to? And is it something that can be read in this setting?
Yes, he wrote actually 3 days after the death of Ita Wegman, and he was really shocked to realize when he'd finished writing this requiem that about Kaspar Hauser, as I said, that actually it was not only the time of the what's the right words, the burning, the
Cremation.
Thank you very much. The cremation. It's not only the time of the cremation of Ita Wegman, but at the same time, it was the bombing of Nuremberg. Practically the whole of the old city of Nuremberg was destroyed in that same time.
Oh, goodness.
And he was really shocked to experience that.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
I'm sorry, I can't read the whole requiem because it's about 34 pages, I think. But when Karl Koenig writes for 3 days, then it's not just going to be a few pages, you know. But it is, it's a very special thing to read. It's partly in verse form, bringing very much history, Egyptian history and about Napoleon, and so many elements are coming. It would be very difficult to read that at one time. We have printed it in the book about Karl Koenig and Kaspar Hauser.
Thank you. Julia is next. Please unmute your machine, Julia. Still muted.
Look on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, the very bottom left-hand corner.
Wow. Bottom left corner.
Probably she has her speaker settings.
Didn't happen. No. All right. She's trying to speak, we cannot hear.
Okay.
All right, anybody else, dear friends? So, okay, so Ryan, can you also speak kind of a little bit towards the microphone? So people can...
Okay,
Can you hold on just for a sec? Sorry. Yeah, great. Cool. Go ahead.
I was able to get the unmute. Hello, I want to thank you for your lecture. It's deeply moving, and I have followed Kaspar Hauser since I was much younger, so I'm very moved by this. And what I'm getting from your lecture is a little bit the idea of living with questions. And so I wanted to bring the question of that aspect of money in which you speak about when we work for money and when we don't work for money or work for love, and that this pays things back. There's this question in the world. I think this is very pertinent for us to live with the question because money has become so strong, such a driving force, particularly for the young, and the difficulty of trying to live just a regular life and what it takes to do that nowadays. So I wanted to bring that just into the discussion. I just because of the question of money when you want to do something for free, and then what it takes for you to be to pay your rent and your your overhead. um, this question of being able to do that if you're out in the world and not in an environment such as certain places where you can work a little bit more like that. I just wanted to bring that into this discussion because that's a big question for me. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to say, and I want to thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very sorry that that was a very short part of the lecture, but it would be a whole evening's theme, of course, to look at the fundamental social law. And what people don't realize is that Rudolf Steiner not only gave these 3 essays about the fundamental social law, which basically says one cannot work for money, so to speak. Apart from these essays, which are very special and were never finished, he also gave a public lecture which has actually been printed privately in America. It's been translated by Gary Lamb and printed about the fundamental social law. And it's not been officially printed, also not in German, unfortunately. But in this lecture, Rudolf Steiner is quite clear that one needs to find practical ways of helping each other to work without being paid for it. And he says that, for instance, if we create a community of people working together who have a common I think he says a common box or something, where all the money goes in, and they pay what they need out of that common box, but do not take it personally. It's quite a practical approach he takes there in this lecture, which unfortunately was not printed. So as I say, Gary Lamb has printed it. And a third thing is that at the same time, this is all 1905, in the same year, 1905, he gave an esoteric lesson about the same content. So you see on 3 levels, lecture and essays and an esoteric lesson about exactly the same subject. And there he really says how that needs to be the central task for spiritual science for the future. And says that it is actually a deep spiritual law that human work has to be lifted out of economy. Now, I like to quote a contemporary who has very similar ideas, and that is Edgar Kahn. And maybe some of you have heard of him. He created the Time Dollar Institute in Washington. And he says exactly the same, basically. And he says that, as you were just mentioning, everything which creates values in society, true human values, that happens outside of economy. It is bringing up children, for instance, or very much looking after older people. Very many things that actually don't fit into economy. And if we try to put them into economy, then it ends in tragedy, because it doesn't work. And we have to see that what we have as economy today is not creating values for the future. We have a dilemma there that I think we really need to look towards. And I think that can be seen as connected to the American task for the future. And I don't mean the next epoch, right? I mean the very near future. We need to find practical ways. Rudolf Steiner was very practical about these things, although he also gave esoteric content to, so to speak, give a basis for it. But he was very practical in saying how we could achieve this. And Karl Koenig was very keen on implementing such things in Camp Hill. Over many, many years, even through decades, in Camp Hill centers, people have worked without a wage in many different settings, for the good or the worse. It is not always, because it is something which needs to be developed into the future, and not only in one specific community, but in the whole of economy. So, yes, that is a huge task and a theme of its own, of course. But I do think it is important to see that we have a connection there to the being of Kaspar Hauser too. Just look at this verse of Kaspar Hauser's death, and then you will find this in a very deep way, that it has to do with our connection to the Christ being in the end, who speaks in us. So, thank you for saying that again, and let's live with these questions.
Thank you so much. So Ryan is next. Ryan is present here in Chicago, physically.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Yeah, and also can you also speak in the microphone?
I want to look at Richard as I
If
speak.
you look
so-
on him, I'm not speaking.
I would like to ask a personal question. Very much connected to the lecture tonight, which I found very effective. You clearly are weaving various elements together that you have long been working with. But I'm wondering if you can speak to the experience of the process of doing the work of weaving these things into the form that you delivered them this evening. If you could say something about what you went through in making this come together, or allowing it to come together, or helping it to come together.
Thank you. That of course, is a huge question.
Yes.
But I would approach it simply by saying, I think this is what spiritual research is about. And spiritual research is, let me be so bold to say, an artistic process. In a similar way that one takes a piece of paper or a piece of wood and some colors and brings them together, and hopefully something comes about which leads us somewhere which is not in the colors and not in the paper and also not in the artist. So that is the experience of the process. Spiritual research is, for instance, to study Rudolf Steiner to the point of realizing where the contradictions are and where one can find things that don't seem to have an answer, and then to put them together. And in looking at them together, maybe something new can come about. And perhaps that has something to do with the intention of Rudolf Steiner in the first place. Perhaps. Perhaps. But it is always a perhaps, and not an assertion, but to find that question. And I do believe that is the way to study anthroposophy, the way I understand Rudolf Steiner, to think things creatively enough that they become one's own thoughts. Then life will give the answers. The answer does not come out of my thoughts, but the answer comes from life. That has again to do with destiny, of course, and will be different for each individual person. So that is, I think, thank you for saying it is a personal question, because I can only approach that from a personal point of view. That is what it is meant for me. And the process for another person will be different. But at any rate, to take contents that have come from spiritual science, these contents I could not find myself. If they are seen together in the right, or in a, let's say, in a careful way, in a true way, then perhaps something new can come about. That is the experience. I hope that goes towards answering your question.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So Richard, Hartford is next. Richard?
Yes. Okay. Number one, something that I find very helpful, and when you're dealing with money and getting paid, is always giving something more than the cash value. Always giving something more than the cash value. And just some interesting materialistic comments in the musical Cabaret. It says, money makes the world go around, the world go around, the world go around. Money makes the world go around. Of this you can be sure. We're opposed to being poor.
Thank you for statement, yeah. Okay, Tom McGuire. Tom, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to do one of my favorite things, which is to display my ignorance. The story of Kaspar Hauser, a very moving story, touches our hearts, raises all sorts of spiritual wanderings in our heart. But when we say he provided his sacrifice, when we're saying that he embraced his destiny, aside from this being a beautiful story and also a very horrible story, what was the result of the sacrifice and of embracing his destiny for the world, other than the beautiful story?
Thank you. That is, of course, also a research question, and I do not profess to have an answer to it. But I think one can sense how something has changed after the life and death of Kaspar Hauser, although we still cannot really grasp enough what that was. How could it be that he became the child of Europe after doing absolutely nothing, basically? How could it be that in the same way he still influences or affects people today, as I say, very often through the medium of art, because he's not physically present, and yet he has a presence today, and that is felt by so many people. What could that be? Well, I don't profess to have an answer to it, but it is a reality. And so when Rudolf Steiner gave this answer that through the way he lived and died, something actually did change in earthly life, namely that this connection to the spirit could be upheld, although it looked like that was going to be lost completely in the 19th century. And remember, Goethe and Schiller and so on and so forth had been present in the same part of the world, and yet that was coming to an end. And isn't that interesting that Goethe was not the individuality to uphold the connection to the spirit, after all he actually brought. But it is this child of Europe who actually brought very little. You can't really compare this little verse of contentment with the works of Goethe. You know? And yet, the works of Goethe were not able to influence the world enough that it would change the world. And yet, so Rudolf Steiner, Kaspar Hauser has managed to fulfill this task. It is a mystery. It's wonderful that the word mystery is in this verse of the calendar of the solar too. Why is that word in here? But never mind. It remains a mystery, and I think it's maybe something that we need to work on more and more so that we can sense, maybe not intellectually solve this question, but sense the reality of it. In the same way that in the Middle Ages we have this legend of Parzival, who created this path, so to speak, to the spirit for the human being. So we have Kaspar Hauser in our time who could uphold this path, although civilization was in a situation of losing it. Now, are we in a situation of losing it today too? Yes, of course we are. This danger is very imminent, and therefore Kaspar Hauser is a wonderful example of, through art for instance, a way to realize the tasks that lay before us. And these tasks have to do with this being of Kaspar Hauser. They have to do not with intellectuality, but with heart understanding. They have to do with rediscovering the human being, the being of humanity. And it has to do with allowing this heart knowledge to change our outer world, our social life. That is what it's about, I think. And therefore, I think the foremost research question is, how does this being of Kaspar Hauser relate to what Rudolf Steiner was able to bring as anthroposophy? What does that mean that he could, so to speak, follow on from this being of Kaspar Hauser 33 years later and bring then anthroposophy to human beings who still have the possibility to take this path? So you see, that belongs together, I think. And no, I don't think we can intellectually solve this so easily. What did he really do? It's nice the way you put it, apart from a nice story. It's actually not a very nice story. I've heard from a number of people who don't like to read the novel by Jakob Wassermann because it's not nice, you know. But to know what is not just a story, but what is reality, what has become reality through this being. We won't solve it intellectually, but we can maybe come to a feeling for it.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I have a little statement, just a little detail about cycle of 33 years, because in fact it must be 33 years and 1/3. This is a real cycle.
Yeah.
And which is considered, if you repeat it 3 times, this is exactly 100 years. So it's bringing us to 1933. So, and we can count, see, because, you know, why it's we have this cycle, because when person is crossing threshold, so some kind of fulfillment in the physical world and in spiritual world can be done in this particular number of years, 33 and 1/3. So, and first cycle, we have birth of Rudolf Steiner, after 33 and 1/3 probably, but after 3 of them, this is calculated appearance of Christ in the ether.
Indeed.
Exactly 100 years. So, but one person who named Child of Europe is dying. So in association with Christ, for example, you know that Christ was suffocated in this spiritual world around 1840s because of peak of materialism. But it led to certain event because Christ suffocated in the spiritual world, but it's appeared to the heart of the human beings, inside of the human beings. So, I mean, I cannot say this is exactly what can happen with Kaspar Hauser, but I feel maybe this is some kind of truth because he is appearing in the heart of people. That's why people cannot forget of this particular individuality.
Indeed. Yes, thank you. Yeah, yeah. I think it's important to see that we've gone through the cycle of 100 years, or 3 times 33 1/3 years after the death of Rudolf Steiner. We celebrated that, and we have to look forward now to a new phase, and what could be a new phase in the work of Anthroposophy. And at the same time, we are going towards 3 times 33 1/3 years, twice, since the appearance of Kaspar Hauser. In 2028, that will be 200 years. So that is very special. We're in a very special time now, I think, between 2025 and 2028, where this theme, it seems to me, is very pertinent. And if we remember that research into Kaspar Hauser had over decades actually ended with the tragedy of the task which could not be fulfilled. And there are many studies, also through anthroposophists, on this theme. But to take up the theme that Rudolf Steiner actually spoke of with Ehrenfried Pfeiffer, that Kaspar Hauser was able to fulfill a task, this is new. And interestingly, work with this theme began 100 years after the birth, 200 years after the birth of Kaspar Hauser. 2012, work started with this theme on the fulfilled mission of Kaspar Hauser. Before that, that was not a thing. You look at the literature, you look at the many essays, also in the Goetheanum, or books by anthroposophists. It is always about the task he could not fulfill. That's important, but more important is the task he did fulfill. And you see, with the last question also, how difficult it is to realize what that means. We have only just started with this. In 2012, the very first research into this question. And so this is the research that is taking place very much around the festivals in Ansbach also. And we will be hopefully taking the next step now in summer with this question. So let us see that as a task for the time between now 2025 and 2028 to work on this aspect of Kaspar Hauser. There is not much in the way of literature about it.
So, dear friends, we have 2 more questions, and maybe after Deborah will deliver her questions, so we will conclude our meeting. So, Yaya,
Yeah, I would like to give my place to Deborah, who's been waiting and she hasn't spoken yet, and I've already spoken twice. So please, Deborah, take the place ahead of me, please.
Very nice of you.
No, I that was a mistake. My
No.
put my hand up.
It was the other. It was the other Deborah Grace.
This is Deborah Grace. It's not David Barber. Okay, Deborah Grace. Deborah, you go ahead.
Thank you, Aya. And I don't know if I can say what I hope to say. But I was very moved by many things. But what came through Ryan's question, and when in Richard's response he said, and if you listen, if you pay attention, life will bring the answers. And I think it's so important and connects to the fulfilled mission of Kaspar Hauser, that this connection between us human beings and the spiritual world still exists, that we live with the reality that when we ask the questions from our heart out of love in relation to the spirit, life will bring the answer. And also try to experience the reality of that life, that connection to the spiritual world, which is there for us because Kaspar Hauser lived and died in the way that he did. And so maybe we will have no idea, and maybe sometimes we will wonder who brought that answer. I think the interest of beings like Rudolf Steiner and Karl Koenig and Kaspar Hauser and others is still actively there, and we just need to trust that this is the gift that we live in from Kaspar Hauser, that we can maintain this connection to the spiritual world if we trust in that, and if we ask the questions from our heart and then pay attention to life bringing the answers. Thank you. Oh, I want to say one more thing. Sorry, but this is a plug, because Richard's not going to do it. If you want to connect with the Karl Koenig Institute and also receive the newsletters, which always include a part about the Kaspar Hauser research, please contact me. I did put my email in the chat and be happy to send you that information. So sorry to take away from what I wanted to bring, but.
Thank you, Deborah. Okay, now Yaya.
Okay, I just wanted to add a couple of things. The first is about the perception that was prevalently present about the unfulfilled destiny by Kaspar Hauser. And I think that if we accept this view, it means that we are still hanging on to materialistic judgment instead of values. My personal perception is that Kaspar Hauser has opened a door for us to develop the spiritual contact that is possible, especially now, especially in troubled times. So he has, in my view, completely fulfilled his destiny, because without him and without our materialistic perception of his not achieving in tangible terms something that you can measure and weigh, he has in fact done more than his task. That is one thing that I wanted to say. And the other thing was partly in response to what Julia raised, which is about the very practical problems one has, paying the rent, paying the bills, and all of that. And it is absolutely true. We all have to do that. But in my personal experience, and I can only speak for myself, we can all attempt to be a little bit creative. Draw something, even if you don't know how to, and even if it doesn't please you, the result might be not what one expects. But don't allow that to stop you trying, because you are, even if the result is aesthetically unpleasing, you are creating. Jot down a few words, a few sentences. It might not be a very, never become a famous poet, but you are creating. The act of creating, and it might just be as an exercise, 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, we are contributing to the world creation. The future depends on us on this, on our individual effort to do something positive in the darkest times. So please, please be creative. I know you are, Richard, and you know I am.
Thank you. I would actually, maybe we finish with this. I think if we look at these two missions of Kaspar Hauser, the mission that he was not able to fulfill and the fulfilled mission, then we have to see that there is a dilemma, because the individuality we have come to know as Kaspar Hauser, the way he lived, the way he died, it is almost impossible to imagine that this person could in any way have become a new Grail king. He would not have been able to be a statesman in the south of Germany. It is a contradiction in itself, if you really look at it. And I think this is something which is a little problem in the earlier research into Kaspar Hauser that one couldn't really overcome. How can one think this through? One can't think it through simply because, I believe, we are looking at two completely different beings. And Rudolf Steiner, in the way he speaks, differentiates, by the way. When he speaks of the Prince of Baden, he means the child who was born in 1912, on Michaelmas Day, by the way, and should have become the person to create a new Grail kingdom. This child was incarcerated 12 years in darkness, and then suddenly a being appears, and we have to say from the point of view of not only 19th century science, but today's science, it's actually impossible that a child can go through this torture, 12 years, only with bread and water, and not only live, but also be in the position to develop the way he did. To be able to read and write and draw and make beautiful pictures and have this possibility to reach people across borders, across the world, is something completely different. So what has happened? What happened between the Prince of Baden and Kaspar Hauser? Because when Rudolf Steiner says Kaspar Hauser had the task, the way he lived and died, that's the thread between the human being and the spirit world would not be severed. Then he speaks about Kaspar Hauser, not the Prince of Baden. You see, in the way he speaks, he differentiates. And I think we have to learn to differentiate and realize that somewhere in between, and we have also worked on this question, somewhere in between, something has happened which certainly outer science will not be able to solve. Namely, a different being has incarnated into Kaspar Hauser, not the Prince of Baden. So, is it the Prince of Baden? Yes, it is, but it's not identical with the Prince of Baden. And that is the great riddle that confused all these people who were who'd done this, who'd been involved in this crime. Stanhope, the Earl Stanhope, was completely confused what was happening because their experiment had not succeeded. It had to succeed because it was an esoterically prepared deed. It was an occult deed. They knew it had to succeed, but it didn't. Because the spirit world had intervened. Now, I say this just to point to the fact that this opens up a completely new mystery, of course, but it helps us a little bit to have a feel for what this fulfilled mission really means. And it gives a little hint towards the way we work with anthroposophy. Because not only in Kaspar Hauser research, but also in spiritual research, we do not expect, we do not want to find the answer out of ourselves. We hope that the spirit world will bring the answer. And when we say out of life, the answer will come, it is because our destiny lives also out in the outer world. This is a big riddle of the human being, of course. Out of our destiny, the answer will come because it is guided by the Spirit. Or in other words, the Spirit answers our question. That is what we really mean with anthroposophy. If we follow Rudolf Steiner's path, then we will find a direct connection to the spirit world. That is what the task of Kaspar Hauser has to do with. Not with thinking, but with receiving the answer from the spirit world. Of course, one has to train one's thinking too. But the answer does not come out of our thinking, but out of the spirit world directly. So, you see, this makes the whole question more complicated, of course, but it does help us, I think, to have a feel for the reality of the spirit world speaking into our lives. And that is the only way we will be able to deal with the burning questions of our time. If we can open this door for the Spirit to work. Human thoughts and human ideas and science of today will not solve these questions. Only the Spirit can solve them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Richard, for your presentation. Dear friends, thank you for joining us in Chicago. So please feel free to unmute your machine and say a big thank you to our guest, dear Richard, and I'll see you in the future in our Rudolf Steiner.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you, Andre, for all that you do to make
Work,
these,
yes.
Thank you, sure.
offer these possibilities.
Good night, friends.
Good night.
Good night.